Good evening and welcome to Copperfield's Books virtual event with Becca Piastrelli in conversation with Kraaijvanger. My name's Jamie Madsen. I'm the marketing and events coordinator here and will also be your host for the evening. So just a couple things to note. Keep an eye out on your chat box tonight. I will be using this to share links to purchase tonight's title, discount codes, links where you can find more information about tonight's authors and the like. And additionally, tonight's format will feature around 45 minutes of speaking and will then be followed by a live Q&A. If you have questions or comments for either of the speakers, please go ahead and submit them under the Q&A icon, which you can find right at the bottom of your screen. And now I'm really excited to introduce tonight's author, Becca Piastrelli. Becca writes about her life experiences, facilitates women's gatherings, and is the host of the Belonging podcast. She teaches and speaks on the nature of belonging and runs retreats to help women reconnect with their rooted sense of self. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband, child, 2 cats, and 5 chickens. And in conversation with Becca tonight is visionary entrepreneur, artist, and community maker, Kraaijvanger. Grace created the Hivery as a realization of her longstanding dream to bring a community of women together in a beautiful space that would inspire and empower them to reach their fullest potential. So they are with us tonight to discuss Becca's book, Root and Ritual, Timeless Ways to Connect to Land, Lineages, Lineage, Community, and the Self. So we're so excited to have you both with us tonight. I'm going to hand it straight over to you, Grace. Why don't you take it away?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you, Copperfield, for hosting this conversation with a very talented author and friend and inspiration of mine. I'm going to hold up her beautiful book because I just want to acknowledge that it's this book really it takes you to a beautiful place. It's captivating and it definitely comes from Becca's heart. So I'm honored to be in conversation with you tonight, Becca, on your amazing book, Root and Ritual.
Thank you so much, Grace. Root and Ritual was very much birthed at the Hivery that you conceived of and held space for in the Mill Valley location. So it's just, I always envision us having a moment where we could talk about the creation that was created in your creation, the Hivery.
Oh, thank you. And just to be witness to your process, which we will talk about tonight, has been, again, a real honor. And I just have so much respect for what you've created. I would love, so the book is called Root and Ritual, Timeless Ways to Connect to Land, Lineage, Community, and the Self. And I'm curious, as we kick the conversation off, when did you first know that this was the book that you were meant to write about land, lineage, community, and self?
Yeah, well, I always wanted to write a book, and I had to really dig deep as to why I wanted to write a book. Did I just want to write a book to like feel important or feel like in some way seen? And yes, a little bit. But it didn't really become a book in which I found a through line and a story to tell, and I'm a publisher for that matter, until I could really synthesize my journey with belonging, my journey with loneliness. The book is predicated upon this idea that we live in the Eramessine, or the age of loneliness. That resonated with me when I first heard that term. And the areas in which I talk about tending to my loneliness or my longing to belong, these areas, land, lineage, community, and the self, they are the 4 areas in which I dove deep, the 4 areas in which I reflected on, did practices, cultivated rituals, the areas I will for the rest of my life be working to find healing and connection and meaning in. So this book is an offering of what worked for me, what my practices are. I know there's a lot of conversation about belonging. I know you are a practitioner of belonging in many ways. And this book is an offering from my perspective.
It's fascinating because when you and I met as entrepreneurs and writers, again, like you said, at the Hivery, which was predicated on this belief that when we felt a sense of belonging, that we could thrive and flourish and create and tap into our creativity. you began the book with a chapter on what we long for, like what you just mentioned, and then shared with me that it's actually the last chapter that you wrote. I thought that was really fascinating because it becomes more and more timely as the pandemic wears on. So during the pandemic, this longing for connection and rituals has become so even more relevant, always relevant, but even more relevant as we navigated isolation and feeling lonely. Can you talk a bit about how you feel like this longing is relevant to these times and also universally as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so often in the practice of writing a book, the introduction is written last. So you write the whole book and then you realize what you're writing about. You realize what you actually wrote about.
Right.
And you synthesize that all, right? And so I wrote the book, the manuscript, in the early days of lockdown, pregnant. And then I wrote the introduction on the other side of birth and in the later days of pandemic, but in the early days of early motherhood, which is perhaps the most isolated I've ever felt in my life, particularly in a pandemic. So yeah, it felt like the medicine was working me, just one way of putting, right? This work is my medicine that I'm offering out. Like we teach what we need to learn is another.
Exactly. I was about to say the same thing, and it happens all the time.
Right. And so yeah, I've suffered in isolation in the pandemic, and what it's done is it's just like refined my message and really what my purpose is, which is to talk about this, to make it, to unshame this feeling that so many of us have, which is, it's just like the myth of we're alone, we're feeling lonely alone, and that no, everyone else has it figured out. Social media has really convinced us of that, has it not? That we just can't figure it out and everyone else has it figured out. That so throughout the early pandemic days when I was writing, it just it just felt a little more urgent and necessary. And I ended up adding in a whole chapter around death. I ended up adding in conversations around how we can connect in times of pandemic, and talking about how we can find ways to be together in new and different ways. And so it almost, it kept me to my word. It kept me in integrity.
Yes.
I really had to like litmus test what I was saying, because talking about loneliness and belonging has been, this age of loneliness has been around for a while. And the pandemic has just made it more underlined, italicized, and bolded, I think, for most of us.
Right. And it's fascinating too, because some of the principles that I know that you have been cultivating and practicing, for far earlier, far like beyond the pandemic, but it was also what we really gravitated to in a sense of isolation. For example, you and I were joking, like everyone did their sourdough bread and we all started gardens and so it's fascinating to me that the very nature of what you were calling for us in this book, then we were put in a position to really exercise and practice and walk the walk of. So I'd love to talk to you about the land piece. So in the chapter on tending land, you talk about how nature, plants, and home. So again, back to that place of nourishing ourselves from our own garden, how that connects us to our ancestors, and a feeling of a more nourished self. So I'm curious, will you talk a bit in terms of the segment on land? What was your wish for the reader during that section?
Well, as someone who grew up in the suburbia in the 90s, who wasn't like particularly, like I was really into like Nickelodeon and mac and cheese and going to the mall for a lot of my like childhood life. And it wasn't until I hit my late 20s that I had this like, oh, that's why my parents took me camping every summer. That's why they encouraged me to hike. That
Right.
feels better than these like four walls and screens I'm looking at all day long, which was my reality. So I was really, I often say it was a calling. I was really called back to the living world. This concept of nature is actually a colonial term. It perpetuates the myth that we are separate from the living world, but this is where we come from. We are of the living world. The living world is of us. We are wild. And so I was like, that's interesting. And so my wish for the reader in a time of real eco grief, right? In a time of here in California, wildfire and choking on smoke, and a time of rising sea levels, and a time of real collapse and extinction. Like it can be a lot to hold. It can be a lot to feel. It can be a lot to grieve. And now as a mother, I feel a responsibility to bring my attention to that. And so I had a wonderful teacher, Joanna Macy, who's a wonderful author, and did the work that reconnects. And I remember when I did a course with her, she talked to me about the two things that are going to help us remember how to save ourselves really is grief and wonder. Feeling grief over what is being lost, what once was and no longer is, and the wonder of what is all around us. And knowing my own sort of like, no, mom, I'm not going to go camp. My mom is here. No, mom, we're going to go camping when I'm going to complain the whole time. I just want to be in the mall and plan my birthday parties, which was also a very fun and exciting thing for me too. I had my own severing from the living world where, I like feared a mushroom would poison me and bees would sting me. And so the land section, which is 3 chapters, my wish is to bring in that grief and wonder back into the readers' lives, to re-engage. I think there's so much numbing that's happening right now. Sometimes we have to, there's a lot going on, but right. In those moments of capacity that we can re-engage a sense of like, oh, there's water flowing, there's rain coming from the sky. These trees are rooted and talking to each other. The mycelium network beneath the cement in San Francisco is connecting all over the earth. There are whales as big as skyscrapers, like these sorts of realizations, like that's happening right now. That's happening right now, can bring a reinvigorating a sense of action taking in our lives.
Yes. We crave that. We crave that. I love the idea of nature as wonder. I was on a beautiful hike today, and I feel, especially in California with what we've experienced with the drought, you just look at water with such gratitude. It's an entirely different experience. So thank you for calling it wonder. I love that. So the second section of the book on lineage, I love talking to you about lineage because I know that it's a place in your heart that you're very passionate, and I've always felt, I shouldn't say always, I don't know the journey to your discovery of lineage, but you talk about your own journey of discovering your ancestors. And I'd like to just talk through that with you, and how has that the knowledge of your ancestors, and the wisdom that they've imparted, how does that help you? How does being able to visualize your roots inform what you're exploring in your writing and your work? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've always been like, I loved watching Downton Abbey, and if it's a period costume movie with accents, I'm in. So that's like my starting point of like, oh, I've had a little bit of like a history fascination. And then it goes a layer deeper and a layer deeper and a layer deeper. But I gotta say, what really called me to really diving deep into who and what I come from, which is a lot, millions and billions of beings, was a realization of my own whiteness, was a realization that I had this sense of being a cultureless white girl, and I had no culture, and I dabbled in appropriating other culture. I just felt like I always sort of talked about wanting to be different because I didn't feel a sense of, I now know the term to be indigeneity, of knowing my roots, where I come from. So about 5 years ago, 6 now, 7 now, I really dove in to, and I have the privilege to be able to have records on ancestry.com. But I was able to see like, oh, it's not just like I'm a white person, I'm a settler colonizer in stolen land, which is, I'm descendant of those people, yes, but it's like, oh, there are people from Northern Ireland, there are people from Scotland, and what are the names of these places and what bodies of water are there? What, what's the microclimate there? What's the history of those people there? And to think that the history of people in the world is a history of migration, something we need to remember in these times of movement. And then thinking, well, I know the stories. I'm lucky enough to have the stories of the last few generations, but what about the stories I don't know? And I had to dive deep into the histories of like the legacies of harm of my ancestors.
Right.
To contend with my whiteness, right? And I share some pretty intense realizations I made in the book to bring these things to light, because I am descended from millions of people who all lived so that I could be alive today. And think about the humanity of one human being, and so there's a wonder in that, and there's a grounding in that. And then I started looking to the ways my ancestors that I know like celebrated the seasons. How did they get through the long winter? How did they get through? They didn't have, sad lamps. How did they get through? How did they commune together? What did they eat? So I really weave a whole thing in the lineage section for everyone who's reading, no matter who and what they're from. There's a pathway to go down to connect in a more deeper way.
I'm curious because you bring to light this conversation around lineage that is complex, and some of us know our lineage and some of us don't. But what experiences or possibilities are you hearing from readers as they kind of dig deeper into where they come from, or how does that experience translate for them in various degrees of knowing lineage and not knowing lineage, or rejecting lineage or embracing lineage?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a large subset of readers that also identify as white or descendants from what is now known as the continent of Europe, who needed a place to process shame, needed a place to process the legacy of harm that their ancestors participated in, and needed a way to connect to far beyond just those stories.
Right.
As a way, and I talk about processing all of that and navigating all of that is a way to become a good ancestor or better ancestor yourself. So that is one thing that I am happy to provide a space for. And then the other is for folks who are adopted or don't feel a safe connection, have really no interest in their ancestors of recent generations, or feel a connection to lineages that aren't maybe by blood.
Right.
I did an interview with the owner of New Orleans bookshop. They're queer, and they said on their ancestor altar, they put a brick to honor their queer ancestors from the Stonewall riots. And I thought, well, that's a beautiful example of honoring affinity lineage. If you're a writer, to connect with a lineage of writers, if you're in a spiritual tradition that you've been adopted into, that, or I know people who have a meditation practice and connect to spiritual elders that are definitely not of their blood. And then folks who connect to beyond human ancestors, like, yes, we're all descended from the mitochondrial Eve, but what's before that, right? We are literally descended from mushrooms. We are literally descended from trees. We are literally descended from stars. And so to just widen the lens of what that can mean for you and give permission to every reader or person listening here to follow the tendrils of curiosity and not see it as like, oh, I gotta figure out who my ancestors are, but like, what is calling to you? Because there are millions and billions of beings that came before you that contribute to you breathing and your heart beating in this moment.
Such a thoughtful and thought-provoking concept. And very, very mindful, kind of bringing us internal in and allowing us to be external in like that interconnection among us as a humanity. That's really beautiful, Becca. One of the things I loved about your book is that it's very experiential. So for those of you that are listening, you're getting to hear and experience Becca's wisdom, her passion, but she really brings the reader in, because the exercises that you provide, Becca, are very, they're a way of like interacting and trying on and layering into our day-to-day lives these concepts that you're teaching. I really enjoyed those. They're everything from journal prompts, and I'll let you talk a bit more about the exercises, but I'd also like to understand how those came about. How did you make them your own? How did you experiment with the exercises in the book as you were writing it? Because it's this integration that brings the reader on the journey with you, and they're really beautiful.
Thank you. That they were tough. They were maybe
I'm sure. Trying to connect with people through these various modalities, I can imagine.
Right. And what is like too hard? What will people shy away from? What is just enough? Yeah. So I always knew, like, in the design of the idea of this book, that I didn't want it to be, I wanted to have opportunities to disrupt the pattern that so many of us get into when we read books, which is just to barrel through and keep it from here up, and to cognitively read these take in these really interesting bits of wisdom or ideas, right? But I want it to integrate into our somatic experience, our bodies, because that's how we're going to shift these patterns of being and living that are causing suffering, harm, frustration, feeling like holding us back. So the whole point with dabbling in and dotting in the book throughout all the sections, opportunities to reflect in a journal, opportunities to go stand on the earth, opportunities to do a ritual, opportunities to connect with other people, opportunities to make pickles, opportunities to make flower crowns. This is all a way of hopefully getting the reader to pause and integrate in some way, because a seasonal cyclical way of being, which is ultimately how I believe we can live in a way that is more healing, has periods of integration, and has winters, has rest periods. So that was the intention. And then it was really a collaborative effort. So I had my ideas, and then I have community members and podcast listeners I would ask. I had like a little editing team that helped me finish the book in those early pregnant or postpartum days, and they would suggest ones. And they, at some point, we just had to call it because I constantly get ideas of activities, and they're very much inspired in the moment. But I'm really pleased, and I know a lot of people really like the pickle section, so it somehow needed to be in there.
I love that. And it's so interesting too, the lessons that we learn, like without knowing that where the lesson's going or what the lesson is inside. Like we didn't know that how much we needed to work with our hands to calm our mind until we do it. We didn't know how much, being in circle, making flower crowns together helps create this feeling of connection and the new passages of spring until we do it. So I thought it was really beautiful, because when you give the lesson and then you gave the exercises, again, it gives us this way to practice, but it also gives us new opportunity to learn. Oh, I didn't realize that I would feel that connection to the land through this exercise. So I appreciated those. Thank you. Yes. So you talk about, you touched on this in the beginning, but you know that one of my favorite topics to talk about, probably of all time, is community. Because I wholeheartedly agree with you that so much of the gap between what we yearn for and where we think we are is often because we feel alone. So that feeling of belonging, that wanting to feel connected to others around us, and the way that we can lift each other up and support and listen. So I really, of course, the parts on community resonated with me so deeply. And I'd like to understand from you, like, what personal experiences informed understanding the importance of community. I think you went through a lot of transformation while you were writing this book as a new mom. shelter in place. And there were life changes that are pretty major and significant. But I'd love to understand how that understanding and appreciation for community has evolved or changed through those kind of major life cycles of writing a book, becoming a new mom, all amidst these times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure we all have our individual answer to that. You know, I find that this is the big important one after reflecting over the last 2 years. And yes, I did a lot of research for the book to really ground what I'm saying in facts and data, just to like appease that part of our brains that need it, right? And to learn. So I did all this research in the early shelter in place time, because that's when I started really writing, when we thought it would be 2 weeks and the dolphins were coming back to Venice. Yeah. Remember that? And the market ran out of yeast. I really delved into the fact that loneliness is a relatively recent documented chronic condition in society, that it's really only been documented. The Economist was talking about this, documented in language and written word in the last like 150 years, which really ties into in the Industrial Revolution and the creation of cities, the separation of majority of people from the countryside, the money being made in cities, and then the invention of the car, taking us off the streets and, you know, running into each other at street corners and connecting, taking us off the streets. And then eventually this culture in like the industrialized world of hyper-individualism, where the success of a human being is that did they do it alone? Do they bootstrap it and do it alone? Are they living alone in their very nice home alone? And
Right.
Good job. So so then I had a baby in isolation, and I thought, oh my gosh, this hyper-individualist way is hurting us, because I am hurting. I always sort of hurt a little bit, but I could go out and find in some way, go to the Hivery, go to places, right? But then I couldn't. But it's like, oh, but we're still, and then I was in need. I was a human in need. I couldn't, I tried to do it on my own, and then I was in need, and there was a real feeling of neglect.
Yeah.
And the women, the mothers and parents who came before me, I could text them and they would be like, yeah, oh yeah, not even in a pandemic, oh yeah. And then it really just lit up this sense, this full body knowing of like, oh, the way we survived as human beings was together in community. And then diving back into the research and just reading about how our nervous systems respond to a hug, and how like we can sleep better, we can digest better. There's all
Right.
this studies out there. And I'm not talking about you can't be an introvert. I always have to come in and say, people who say, well, I'm an introvert and I love solitude. Solitude is nourishing. Loneliness is a state of pain. And no matter our feelings about and getting energy or how much we want to be around each other, we do need each other.
Yes.
We do need each other. So that's just also underlined 400 times for me now. And one of my greater passions is community care. Like, do we know the names of our neighbors, even if they vote differently from us, even if their vaccination status is different from us? Do we know, can we help them if the power went out? Do we know the evacuation routes? Can we take them with us? Like, have you checked on them recently? Like, really, do we know how to care for each other? And the answer for most of us is like, it's like, we're busy, or there's a culture of leaving each other alone, or whatever it is. So I'm interested in talking about that more. And that lit up for me when writing the community section, especially.
That's so beautiful. I had this incredible experience during the early part of the pandemic, particularly the shelter in place. I live on a it's a small street, and there's only 6 houses on the street. And we all knew each other, some of us better than others, some of us almost not at all. And during this shelter in place piece, we started doing this. It was called 6 feet a party. And we all sat in our driveways and had happy hour. And it's the most connected I have felt to other human beings, and that connection, long after the shelter in place was over, we kept that every Friday, showing up every Friday, being together. And we are extremely close now. Yet we had lived on the same street for years and years, almost, over a decade without that connection. So it does show you when we realize it, when we experience it, when we taste it, we can live and feel the difference.
Yeah.
I before the pandemic, I remember this. There was a statistic that 1 in 4 Americans has 0 best friends, 0 like close. So I'm curious what that is now, if that has changed. But I really appreciate the focus on community, and almost sometimes we have to be reminded and retaught the very things that are like the kind of the basis of our existence. And sometimes, like you said, the specific examples of, have you reached out to your neighbor? Do you know how they're really doing, regardless of if you agree with their views or not? We need to be reminded of that as a society.
Yeah, that's really why I wrote the book. It's a reminder to myself first. And
Yes.
yeah, often it is that simple. I think we just tend to over intellectualize and complicate the very basic needs of our bodies and our souls. And I find that I forget and remember that every month, every moment. And
Yes.
and that's okay. We come from a really intense, many century old history of taking us away from each other. The great severing that is capitalist patriarchy is taking us away from the land, taking us away from each other, taking us away from our own body knowing. And so it's sometimes we have to be gentle with ourselves, that maybe our longing for community is also a little scary.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a feeling of unworthiness, or can't trust, or I've been burned before. I do a whole section on how we yearn as adults. We yearn for meaningful adult friendships, and often what holds us back from that is like a friendship gone wrong, or a moment that didn't that someone got burned, and I even say, like, I have played all parts in that play. I have been the clique leader, I've been the clique follower, I have had my secrets told, I have told someone's secrets, I have filled every role. And so there's a ritual in one of the chapters for really burning, physical burning, letting go of all of those experiences that may be clouding or preventing you from getting the connection, friendship, meaningful friendship, flipping the script. Maybe in the friendships you have, it's like the same sort of toxic relating. I always say, like drinking wine and talking crap about the women who aren't there, and like how we can shift that dynamic with each other. It just takes some letting go and some intention setting. So it's totally possible for all of us, even in these times. Even we can navigate conversations around health risk and body consent and all of it. I am proof. I have navigated some very tough conversations with friends, and we have found ways to go deeper and be together in these times. And that is what we need.
Yes. And we learn from the past, right? We learn from the past of what are the ancient rituals that connected us? What are the ancient rituals that created avenues for forgiveness or grief processing or shaming, or all of the various things that have been, we think we're so original, but since the beginning of time, humans have been grappling with these, with pain and celebrating joy and birth and death. So it's beautiful to me the way that you also connect the concept of community with the concept of lineage, and how we take rituals from past communities and learn from them, grow from them, share them, and possibly embody them or practice them. So how have readers responded to this view into your world of tying the past into the present, and whether that's through community ritual or through our private rituals or rituals with the land? Like, tell me more about how your readers have responded to this idea of past and present and connection.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's sort of my thing at this point, and so it's definitely resonated. I think what's resonated the most is when I share about rites of passage. This idea that all of us, no matter our gender, no matter our stage of life, we go through radical life transformation, whether that's having a baby, partnering up in some sort of commitment to a partner, losing a loved one, having a really serious sickness, moving on from a job, completing a partnership. There are so many. And a rite of passage just is defined as you enter into the society and seen as changed, like your identity changes in society. And there was a before.
Yes.
And now you're where you are now. And I talk in the community section about bringing the celebration and the witnessing of community by community of our rites of passage, and not just leaving it to the three which is like birth, marriage, death, which I think there's too much pressure on these now, because actually we're constantly, if we're in a community, there's constantly moments to witness each other in our transformations. So I actually led a workshop where I guided a group of people in creating their own ritual for a rite of passage that they'd already gone through. How many of us can think back to a major transition that we went through in life that wasn't given the honoring that we wanted, And there were just such tender shares of people talking about like then getting their first period, or wanting to have a conversation with their parents when they got divorced, when they were children, to really like tell the truth and honor that. A first sexual experience, graduating from college. And so the seed I planted in that workshop and the seed I planted in the book are the same, which is we need to create what we crave here, because so much has been lost, but it's not lost forever. And so can we create ritual for honoring? I myself participated in a ritual where we recreated that first period I got when I was 12 years old. And it was a really, really special experience. And I did it when I was 34. So that has resonated deeply. I think so many of us are craving not just the ritual and the ability to emotionally process that time, but also for others, our community, to see it, to see us as changed. Otherwise, we're stuck in that sort of nostalgic cycle, and we're not here now looking forward.
It's like a deeper layer of permission to kind of keep expanding. And yes, beautiful. Yeah. It's beautiful. So I feel like I'm asking a bit of a rhetorical question, because I know from the passion that your work comes from, that you write from a place that is very close to your emotional center. But I'm curious if the writing process for you was an emotional process, and if it brought up painful things, or things that you were working through as you were writing. Again, I feel like I know the answer from the passion with which you speak, but I kind of want to ask it nonetheless of, what was that process like for you?
Yeah, writing the book was really hard for many reasons. I was pregnant. So my daughter and I wrote it together, and I got the book deal and I conceived my child the same week, and then they were due the same week. So there was like a pressure cooker, and then there was shelter in place, and then there was being nauseous for most of it.
It's like, it is a gestation. It is like, it's a perfect metaphor. Yes.
Yeah.
Living the metaphor.
Right. And then, and it was really my intention to be honest, to tell the truth. That is one of my goals of life, is to always tell the truth. And yeah, there's some stories in there that are tender.
Yeah.
Really, really tender. And now they're out in the world for everyone to read. And that was what I wanted. That was what I wanted. But yes, it was deeply emotional. I have this writing playlist. I don't know if people are familiar with the composer Max Richter. He writes really emotional, like cinematic orchestra music that just I sort of need to cry to write. And I just needed to like pull. I have a friend who says you always have to write from the heat. But for me, it was like not the heat, it was like right from the like lump in my throat to really pull it up. So that was my method. Just play really emotional cinematic music and just pull it up from the deep.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because as soon as you say that, I can feel that in the words. So that was it worked. That was a process that worked. I mean, I want to make sure that we allow some time for questions, but I'm sure that the listeners are wondering too. And I asked this question carefully because sometimes when I am asked this question, there can feel like a pressure, and I mean no pressure at all. Sometimes it's like, let's just celebrate what you created and revel in that for as long as we want to. But I am curious if you're thinking about what's next for you, what excites you, are there any inklings of things that are coming up for you that you want to explore?
I so appreciate this question coming from you and the awareness and sensitivity around it, because I'm very much in a place of just letting the book sort of work its way through the hands of the folks who are meant to have it, and being available to talking about it with whoever wants to. And in many ways, I'm still navigating the rite of passage that is motherhood. Yes. And I'm wintering. It's winter right now here in the Northern Hemisphere. So this is the most spiritually boundaried, people are familiar with this term, but like I've got some good rock solid boundaries right now over letting myself not jump into the next thing, my ideas. And I'm pretty sure it has to do with revillaging and community care. But I think right now I've got to be in the practice of my work. So, and I wonder how it'll feel, when the sun like hits my bedroom window in the morning again in a few more months, and the flowers start to bloom and my garden gets bustling and the chickens start laying more eggs, and I just sort of feel the sap rising again in my body and in the bodies of the trees around me. But right now, there's not much stirring beyond responding to the book, what people want to talk about with the book, and responding to, what my body and my baby's body needs.
I really appreciate and deeply respect that, because I think sometimes when you're a creator, a creative force, as you are, there is there's a societal pressure that tells us, okay, look what you did. That was amazing. What's next? What's next? What will you do now? And I feel like the lesson in the book was the opposite of that.
Yeah.
The lesson in the book was, slowing that kind of productivity mania and reconnecting with what's real and human, and natural and frankly important. So I was curious, like what inklings are coming up for you, and at the same time I deeply respect that you are where you are. You've created something really beautiful and helpful and of service at a time when I think people needed it more than you could have ever even imagined when you initially conceptualized this book. And so I admire just the being in that and being generous and gracious with yourself in that moment. So, and I know that there's so much that you're doing to connect with readers and interviews like this, where you're putting this wisdom out there, and in that way you're also being of service. So thank you. I'd love to take a moment and see if there are any questions. I'm just going to peek at the chat really quick. Oh, I love that. It's hard to let go of the striving and the need to plan for what's next. Yes. Are there any questions out there from the group? Yes, here's a really good one from our dear Susan Schroeder. Have there been any surprises that came up for you in the writing and publishing process? What surprises came up, Becca?
Yeah, because I didn't know what I was doing. This is my
Then everything's a surprise.
everything's a surprise. I mean, I have to say, a shout out to my publisher, Sounds True. They're based out of Boulder, Colorado. And I had heard from some other fellow authors with other publishers, not to talk smack about any publishers, but just like sometimes it can be kind of a crunchy process. And I felt like the belle of the ball. And I worked with an entirely female team, from lawyers to engineers, to editors, to sales and marketing, to copy editors, to diversity readers. And it was just all such a dang pleasure. And I kept, I wish I had sort of rode that wave a little bit more, because I kept being like, wait, it's going to get bad soon. It's going to get hard soon. And it just truly never was. So I'm very happy to be a Sounds True author. And they're just such a pleasure to work with.
Oh, I love that. I would love that. I happen to know a smidgen about the early part of the process that a dear friend of yours, Jenny, was part of coaching you through your book proposal process. And I really love that story that you shared with me. I wondered if you would share that as well, just as part of the early stage of the beginnings of your process.
Oh yeah. Pre-getting the deal was a test of endurance, and a real dig deep situation in which I had a dream, and I finally figured out what it is I had to share, and had conversations with many people who turned me down.
Yes.
And fellow former Hivery member and dear friend Jenny Heffernan Brown said I was sort of dragging my feet on writing the proposal, which is you write like basically a whole outline of the book, and you write a sample chapter and a whole marketing plan, and you write, it's like 90 pages. And I was just feeling really scared and really unworthy and really rejected and really like, who am I? And I suck, basically. And she said, well, why don't 2 days a week, we'll go up to the Mill Valley Library, and I'll sit with you for an hour and a half by your side, and you'll write that proposal, and I'll just like doodle on my iPad, and we'll get it done. And that is how it got done. We'd walk up to the library, we'd sit surrounded by the redwood trees, and we'd set a timer, and I would tap, tap, type, and she would draw, and we got it done quick, couple weeks.
I mean, I feel like so often, whether it's like writing a book or cleaning our closet or whatever, like, or sitting down to pay the bills, like when we have an accountability partner that cares about us and is willing to sit with us through the hard times, I mean, that makes a huge difference. I love that. I think we're all going to want a little 90-minute, 2 days a week library buddy to sit with us through the, not just the hard stuff, but something that you deeply desired and really wanted for yourself. And she saw that.
Oh yeah. Cosmic hand holding. We all need it.
So there's a fabulous question from Betsy, who I believe is your mom. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes, I thought so. This is a great question, though. I wonder if we also inherit our ancestors' yearning for community. Many of our mothers and grandmothers were pressured to conform to societal pressure and to suppress themselves. Do we carry that, and can we heal them when we heal ourselves? Such a beautiful question. Do you want me to read it one more time? Did you?
Oh no, I got it.
You got it. Okay, great.
Yeah. So these are conversations my mother and I have. Yeah, so there's this concept called epigenetics, which has proven that trauma can be genetically passed down in our cells, the trauma of our ancestors. And so I would also say that the joy and the resilience of our ancestors too resides in our DNA, our blood and our bones. And so in that way, I can attest to feeling like my deep yearning for community being more than just mine. And I often have conversations with my mother who's here about our ancestors who just like never got that cosmic hand holding, never got that, deep eye gaze. I trust you and I love you. Like that there's so much that was taken away, particularly in the last few hundred years from our ancestors. And so Betsy asked, can we heal them when we heal ourselves? So I'm of the belief that we can. And I work in a modality called Ancestral Constellation, which is a physical somatic modality of working. It's the teacher of it is Bert Hellinger, who learned it from an African tribe in Southern Africa. And it was, so it's an indigenous practice of bringing ancestors, living or past, onto a field and having healing conversations in order to heal up the line. And so my mother and I have done this in person, and it is a really beautiful therapeutic practice that more and more psychotherapists are facilitating here in the United States, and really again originated from a conflict resolution practice in this Southern African region of the tribal people, of when there's a rift in the tribal community, which is a much smaller community than we have today, right? 150 people, that they all sit in a circle and they bring in people to play the players in the conflict, and no one leaves the circle until there is a resolution. And so Bert Hellinger brought this practice to post-World War II Germany, which has had such a trauma experience, several wars. And then now it's a practice that is done here. So just a little plug, if someone's like, ooh, that sounds interesting, take a look. There are practitioners everywhere.
That is a beautiful example and story. Thank you so much, Becca. Well, I really want to encourage everyone who's on the call. I'm looking down at the book now. It's a beautiful book. It is a helpful and inspiring, marrying practical and the sense of passion that Becca brings through her words. So I would encourage you not only to get your own copy, but to gift it to someone who needs it. I feel like this is just a period where we need exactly the lessons and wisdom that Becca has shared with us. So please do that. I know that there is, Copperfield is doing the 10% discount, I believe, on Becca's book with the promo code ROOT, I think it is. It's in the chat. Becca, what a delightful time. Is there anything else that you would like to share with readers, or any other practices or a favorite ritual that you might like to close our conversation with?
Well, I do want to thank Copperfields not only for hosting this wonderful conversation, but also to being so supportive of me. I don't even know if like Jamie, who's facilitating this call, knows, because I know Copperfields is all their individual stores, but I've had such beautiful, I've been treated so wonderfully at every Copperfield store, where they front face the book, which does a lot for selling it, and had me sign and feature me as a local author. And there's something just so wonderful about a local independent bookstore. So people are asking like, where should I buy it? And like, the truth is anywhere, but or like the truth as far as like moving the dial is anywhere. And I always say, but if you can buy it at a local bookstore that aligns with your values, like get as many as you can, because that's where the beauty is and the connection is made.
Yes.
And then a final, I think what I would love to end on is like a wish for the reader, a wish for anyone who reads this book or is gifted this book or listens to this on YouTube 5 years from now. And this is some sort of digital artifact of the times to is to remember that we operate at a slower pace than the machines tell us, that our inboxes and our devices, and I know we have to be on these at times, and the pace of things, this whole concept of urgency is hurting us. And so if it resonates with you that our ancestors lived in a different way, and that our bodies are still are still operating and designed at the pace they lived, that the simplest, most nourishing thing we can do for ourselves is to slow down and encourage others to slow down. And one of the most beautiful ways I love for people to do in their inbox is on their signature of their emails to say, hey, I operate at a slower pace to provide for my nervous system or my family. I've seen people write really cool things about, like, I don't spend all day on the computer. Please allow up to 72 hours for my response, or whatever it is. I find that's like a little spell that goes out into the world and gets us all to go, oh, right. So that's my wish.
Oh, Becca, we all needed that. We do. What a beautiful wish and what a beautiful reminder. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. And again, I thoroughly enjoyed your book. I'm honored to get to be in conversation with you. Jamie, thank you for putting this together, and I'll turn that over to you.
Thank you so much. That was so thought-provoking and just incredibly warm and nourishing. I like that word, Becca, because it really was. I've received so many comments, as you guys are saying, thank you, and how wonderful this was. And to everyone watching, yes, this is being recorded. Everyone will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording, details where to purchase the discount code. I'll include the links to the podcast and where to find more information about the Hivery and all the good stuff. So thank you all for being with us tonight. And thank you, Grace, and thank you, Becca. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Bravo, Becca.
Thank you all.
Have a good
night. Bye.
Bye.